It had been weeks since the court case began, and every day felt like a battle. The emotional toll weighed heavy on me. Each testimony, each argument was a reminder of the life I had lost, the love I had given, and the lies that had shattered everything. But despite the endless hours of sitting in courtrooms and listening to lies spun by Linda's team, something inside me was shifting. I wasn't just a victim of Robert's deceit anymore. I was becoming someone else, someone stronger, someone who would not be silenced. Michelle and I had spent countless hours poring over documents, dissecting Robert's finances, and cross referencing his transactions. Every day, the evidence we uncovered pointed toward the same conclusion. Robert had been living a double life, and Linda had been at the center of it all. I couldn't let the case end without proving it. But the turning point came when I found something I hadn't expected. It was late one evening, the soft hum of the house in the background as I went through the last of Robert's old paperwork. There were boxes of old legal documents in the basement that I had never thought to check. I'd been avoiding them. Too many memories. Too many things I wasn't ready to face. But tonight, with the case hanging by a thread, I needed to dig deeper. I opened the first box and began to sift through the old files. Some were irrelevant: tax returns, expired insurance policies, old letters from the bank. But then, at the very bottom of the last box, I found it: a file marked Final Will, Robert Des Smith. My heart stopped. This was it, the real will. Not the one that Linda had presented in court, the one that would prove everything. I pulled it out slowly, as if the weight of what I was about to find might shatter me. The envelope was thick, the paper crisp. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside, I found a handwritten note that sent a shiver through me. This will supersede any previous versions. It is my final decision regarding the distribution of my estate. This is the document that should be considered in all legal matters concerning my assets. I felt a lump form in my throat. This was the document we had been searching for, the document that could expose the truth about Robert's intentions, his betrayals, and his plans for the future. I couldn't contain the surge of emotions, anger, betrayal, and a sense of power that I hadn't felt in weeks. I turned the page, my eyes scanning the contents. As I read, I realized that this wasn't just any will. It was a declaration of my rightful place in Robert's life. In this version, everything was left to me, not Linda, not anyone else. There, in black and white, Robert had written, "To my wife, Maggie Des Smith, I leave all assets, properties, and financial accounts. The rest of my estate, including the Nantucket property and the Summerball estate, shall be managed by Maggie." I couldn't believe it. It was the confirmation I needed. Not only had Robert been hiding this will, but he had also manipulated his own family. Linda's will was a forgery, a clever piece of deception designed to strip me of everything I had ever worked for. My hands were clammy, but my mind was clear. This was it, the moment I had been waiting for. The next day, I showed Michelle the will. She was equally stunned. "This is it, Maggie. This is the piece we needed. Linda's will was a fake, and this proves it. We can take this straight to the judge." Michelle and I spent hours preparing our case, gathering every shred of evidence that supported our claims. It wasn't just about the will. It was about the years of manipulation, the fraud, the lies. We had the financial records to prove that Linda had been receiving payments disguised as legitimate consulting fees, the evidence that Robert had used company funds to support her lifestyle. When we returned to the courtroom, I felt a surge of confidence I hadn't experienced before. It wasn't just about the money or the property anymore. It was about reclaiming my life, my dignity, and exposing the truth that had been buried for so long. The courtroom was packed as we entered. But this time, I didn't feel like an outsider. I felt like I had control. I was no longer the widow who had been erased from her husband's legacy. I was the one who had found the truth. And now, I was going to share it with the world. "Your Honor," Michelle began, her voice firm and steady, "we are here today with the final version of Robert Des Smith's will. This will, which supersedes all previous documents, clearly states that Maggie Des Smith is the rightful inheritor of his estate. We also have evidence that the previous will, which has been presented by the opposition, was forged." The room fell silent. I could see Linda's lawyer, Gregory Harris, tense up, his confident facade slipping for the first time. His eyes darted to Linda, who sat with her hands folded in her lap, her face pale. I could almost see the panic in her eyes. Michelle continued, "In addition, we have uncovered a series of fraudulent transactions, payments made to Ems Mallister under the guise of consulting fees, all funded by Robert's company. These payments were not only excessive, they were unauthorized and, as you'll see, timed suspiciously close to Robert's death." I stood up, my heart pounding, as Michelle handed the judge the stack of documents that laid everything bare. The judge, a stern woman who had remained impartial throughout the proceedings, glanced through the evidence, her expression unreadable. "I believe we've seen enough," she said after a long pause. There was a moment of silence, but this time, it wasn't the oppressive silence of waiting for a decision. It was the kind of silence that comes just before a storm. The judge's gavel came down with a resounding thud. "I have reviewed the evidence presented, and it is clear that the will presented by Ems Mallister is fraudulent. The real will, as presented by Mrs. Des Smith, will stand. The estate is hereby granted to Maggie Des Smith, as per the late Robert Des Smith's wishes." The room erupted into murmurs, but I barely heard them. My pulse raced, my head spinning. It was over. The truth had won. Linda's face drained of color. Her lawyer stood in stunned silence, unsure of what to say. But I didn't care about them anymore. I cared about what I had regained, the truth, the power to reclaim my life, and the future that Robert had tried to steal from me. As I walked out of the courtroom, Michelle beside me, I couldn't help but smile. I had been broken, yes, but I wasn't shattered. I had taken back what was mine, and now I would rebuild. The tension in the courtroom was palpable as the judge prepared to issue her verdict. I could feel my heart beating in my chest, each thud echoing like a drum roll in the silence. This was it, the moment I had fought for, the moment I would either reclaim my life or lose it all. Linda Mallister sat across from me, her back ramrod straight, her face a carefully curated mask of calm. But I saw the tremor in her hands, the subtle flicker of panic in her eyes that betrayed the cold facade she was desperately trying to hold up. She was no longer the confident, composed woman who had sat in the front row of Robert's funeral, being praised by our son. She was now cornered, and she knew it. Gregory Harris, Linda's lawyer, stood up to make his final defense. His words were smooth, practiced, but there was a noticeable crack in his voice, something that had not been there at the start of the trial. "Your Honor, we contend that this will," he said, motioning toward the newly presented document, "was fabricated after Robert Des Smith's death. It cannot be trusted. We've presented evidence that Linda Mallister was, in fact, the true beneficiary of his estate." Robert's wishes were clear. I almost laughed. It was the same line they'd been using for weeks, and it was falling apart before their eyes. Michelle stood beside me, her posture firm, her eyes locked on Linda's lawyer, ready to dismantle every last claim. "Your Honor," Michelle interjected, her voice unwavering, "the will we presented today has been verified by experts. Every piece of evidence, from the financial records to the handwriting analysis, confirms its authenticity. We have shown the fraudulent payments Linda Mallister received, the manipulation of Robert's assets, and the years of deceit. There is no room for doubt. The truth is undeniable." I watched as Gregory's face tightened. He knew the game was up. He had nothing left to say. But Linda wasn't going down without a fight. Her lawyer sat down, defeated, and she stood up slowly, her high heels clicking on the marble floor. "Your Honor," Linda began, her voice steady but with a hint of desperation that only I could hear. "I loved Robert. He loved me. We had something real. I never intended for any of this to happen. It's all just a misunderstanding. I was trying to help him. I was his partner, his confidant. He trusted me." The room fell deathly silent. For a moment, I could see her vulnerability, the cracks in her perfect, polished image. But it was too late. The truth had already been exposed. "I was there for him when no one else was," she continued, her eyes scanning the room as if seeking sympathy. "I gave him everything he needed: love, support, understanding. What I did for him." I could feel the anger building inside me, but I remained calm, steeling myself for the words I knew I had to say. I had spent too many years allowing Robert's lies to dictate my life. Now, it was my turn to speak the truth. Don't lie to me, Linda, I said, my voice cutting through her words like a knife. You didn't love Robert. You loved his money, his position, the life he could provide you. You didn't help him. You exploited him. And you exploited me. Her eyes flickered, but she quickly masked her reaction. You don't understand, she said, a faint tremor in her voice. You don't know what it was like. Robert and we were soulmates. I almost couldn't believe the audacity of it. Soulmates. After everything she had done, she was still trying to make herself out to be the victim. Robert wasn't your soulmate, I shot back. He was a man who couldn't face the truth, who couldn't face what he'd done. And now you're here trying to take everything from me, everything that was rightfully mine. Linda faltered for a moment, but she quickly regained her composure. Her eyes locked onto mine, and I could see the coldness in them, the determination to walk away with everything she had taken. But she wasn't going to win. Not this time. I turned my gaze to Daniel, who had been sitting quietly beside his father's lawyer. His face was pale, his hands clenched in his lap. I hadn't heard him speak once during this entire trial. Not a single word in my defense. He had sided with Linda, had believed her lies. But now, as I looked at him, I saw something shifting in his expression, a flicker of confusion, a crack in the walls he had built around himself. Daniel, I said softly, my voice breaking the silence. Please listen to me. This isn't just about money. This is about the truth. This is about the man your father truly was. He wasn't perfect. He wasn't the man you think he was. His eyes met mine, and for the first time in weeks, I saw a hint of something doubt, perhaps. His jaw tightened, and he stood up slowly, his gaze moving between me and Linda. I don't understand, he muttered, his voice strained. Dad always told me. He always said he loved Mom, but he trailed off, his words catching in his throat. And I didn't know. I didn't know any of this. The pain in his voice hit me like a physical blow. For months, I had tried to reach him, to make him see the truth, but he had been too blinded by the lies. Now, in this moment, I saw the shift. The realization was dawning on him, the truth about Robert, the lies, the manipulation. His whole world had been built on a lie. Daniel, your father lied to both of us, I said, my voice gentle but firm. He wasn't the man you thought he was. He wasn't the perfect father, the perfect husband. He hurt us both, and it's time to face that. He stood still for a long moment, his eyes dark with confusion and pain. I could see him processing the truth, the pieces falling into place. Slowly, his expression softened. I don't know what to say, he whispered, his voice cracking. I thought I was defending him, but I see now. I see what he did, what he made me believe. Tears welled up in his eyes as he turned away from Linda. He walked toward me, his steps hesitant but determined. When he reached me, he didn't speak. Instead, he simply wrapped his arms around me, holding me tight. I'm sorry, Mom, he whispered. I should have believed you. It was the apology I had waited for. The apology I thought I would never get. In that moment, everything else, the betrayal, the pain, the legal battle, faded into the background. We were finally standing together, united by the truth. I looked at Linda, who was now standing alone, her expression one of shock and disbelief. The courtroom had turned against her, and it was clear that she had lost everything. The judge stood, her gavel ready to strike. The case has been decided. The will of Robert Des Smith is invalid. The estate shall be inherited by Maggie Des Smith, in accordance with Robert's final wishes, as confirmed by the real will. The room fell silent as Linda's lawyer stood up, defeated, and Linda herself collapsed into a chair. It was over. The truth had won, and I had won back not just my life, but my family. The days after the trial felt surreal. As I sat in the silence of my home, the weight of what had just happened began to settle over me. The courtroom had been the final battleground, the place where the truth had come to light, where justice had been served. But now, in the quiet aftermath, I was left with a strange mixture of relief and disbelief. Linda Mallister was forced to return every single asset she had taken, every penny she had used Robert's name to steal. The Nantucket estate, the Summer Ball property, the funds she had siphoned off Robert's company. They were all returned to their rightful place. And though it couldn't undo the years of manipulation and betrayal, it felt like a small victory, a step toward reclaiming what had been taken from me. I had won the case, but winning didn't bring Robert back. It didn't erase the years of lies or the empty space he had left behind. Still, there was a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. The weight of the false accusations, the manipulation, the constant feeling of being erased, it was all gone. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe. But the real victory, the real redemption, was something far more profound. It came the day Daniel called. The sound of my phone ringing startled me. It had been months since I had heard from him, months since he had chosen to stand with Linda and reject everything I had fought for. His silence had cut deeper than anything Linda could have ever said or done. And in that silence, I had mourned not just the loss of my husband, but the loss of my son. But now, as I looked at the name flashing on the screen, I felt something stir deep inside me. I hesitated for only a moment before answering. Mom? His voice was shaky, hesitant, but there was no mistaking the rawness in it. I don't know where to start. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for everything, for not believing you, for taking your side. I didn't see it. I couldn't see it. I felt a lump form in my throat, my heart heavy with a mix of emotions rushing through me. He was apologizing, finally acknowledging the truth, acknowledging the pain he had caused. And yet, part of me was scared, scared that I had waited too long, that the damage had been done beyond repair. I don't know how to make it right, he continued, his voice thick with emotion. But I want to. I want to start over. I want us to rebuild, to heal. I don't expect you to forgive me right away, but I need you to know I regret everything. I was so blind, Mom. I didn't know what I was doing. Tears welled up in my eyes, and I found myself unable to speak for a moment. This was the son I had raised, the little boy who had looked to me for comfort and strength. And now, he was asking for the same from me. You don't have to make it right all at once, Daniel. I finally said, my voice softer than I expected. I've waited a long time for you to see the truth, and it hurts. It hurts more than you know. But I'm not going to close the door on you. I never did. There was a long pause, and then he spoke again, his voice quieter, more vulnerable. Can I come over? I need to talk to you. I need to see you. I've missed you. It was all I had ever wanted, to hear those words from him, to feel the connection between us that had been severed by lies, manipulation, and my own hurt. I swallowed back the tears, my heart swelling with the hope that maybe, just maybe, we could fix what had been broken. Of course, Daniel, you're always welcome here, I said, my voice steady now, the foundation of our relationship slowly beginning to rebuild. When he arrived, we didn't speak much at first. We just sat together, side by side, in the living room, quietly, as though there was a weight between us that neither of us could fully lift. But there was comfort in it, too. A peace in the shared space that we hadn't had for so long. And then, slowly, as the hours passed, the walls between us began to crumble. We talked, really talked, about Robert, about the pain of betrayal, about the lies that had shaped his view of the world, and about the love that had been there all along, even when it felt lost. I can't undo what I did, he admitted, his eyes red from the weight of the conversation. But I want to be your son again, Mom. I want to learn to be the person you always believed in. I want to make up for the time we lost. And in that moment, as I looked at him, truly looked at him for the first time in what felt like forever, I realized that redemption wasn't just about winning the case. It wasn't just about the assets or the properties. It was about reclaiming the pieces of myself I had lost along the way. It was about rebuilding the relationships that had been torn apart by lies and having the strength to forgive, not just him, but myself. Maybe we can't go back to what we were, I said, my voice steady now. But we can move forward, Daniel, together. The days that followed were filled with small steps, but they were steps in the right direction. Daniel and I spent more time together, slowly rebuilding the trust and love that had been fractured. It wasn't easy, but it was real. And for the first time in years, I felt like I was on the path to healing. As for Linda, she disappeared from our lives as quickly as she had entered it. The assets had been returned. and the case had left a stain on her reputation that she would never be able to erase. Her world crumbled around her, and in the end, I realized that she had never been the one who held power over me. I had always held that power. I just needed to take it back. The final victory wasn't just about reclaiming the estate. It was about reclaiming my dignity, my life, and the future I thought I had lost forever. And with Daniel by my side, I knew that whatever came next, I would face it with strength, grace, and the unwavering knowledge that the truth had set me free. As I sit here now, in the quiet of my home, I can finally breathe again. The years of betrayal, the courtroom battles, the pain, it's all starting to feel like a distant memory. I fought for what's mine, for the truth, for the love I thought I had lost. And in the end, it was never about the money or the property or even the victory in the courtroom. It was about reclaiming my life, my dignity, and the relationships that truly matter. I've come to realize that sometimes life throws the hardest challenges at us, not to break us, but to teach us what we are truly capable of. We are stronger than we think, more resilient than we ever imagined. And while the road to healing isn't always easy, it's always worth it. If you've ever had to fight for what's right, whether it's your family, your identity, or your truth, I want to hear your story. Leave a comment below and share your journey with us. And if you found strength in this story, don't forget to subscribe for more empowering family dramas that remind us all of the power we have within ourselves to reclaim what is ours. I stood at the back of the chapel, my hands trembling slightly as I gripped the edge of my handbag. The room was filled with familiar faces, friends and family who had come to say goodbye to Robert, my husband of 40 years. The air felt thick, heavy with the weight of grief. But it wasn't just grief I felt. It was something much deeper, betrayal. I had loved him. I had stood by him through the years, through everything. His career, his moods, his long hours at the office. He always told me I didn't need to work, that he would take care of me. And I had believed him. I had poured my soul into our home, into our family, into the life we built together. But now, here I was, standing at his funeral, feeling like a stranger in my own life. The moment Daniel stepped up to the podium, I felt a chill in my bones. My son, our only child, stood there with a look of solemnity on his face. I expected him to speak of his father, of all the good memories, of the lessons Robert had imparted to him over the years. But what Daniel said next completely blindsided me. He paused, his voice wavering slightly as he cleared his throat. "There's someone here today who truly deserves our gratitude," Daniel began, his words faltering just for a moment. "She's been there for my father in ways none of us can understand. She's more family to us than anyone could have imagined." He looked down at the front row, where she sat, the woman I had never imagined would be here today, Linda Mellister. I could hear the murmurs ripple through the room as everyone turned to look at her. She was dressed in a fitted black dress, her makeup flawless, her hair immaculately styled. Her eyes were glossy with what seemed like carefully practiced tears, and she smiled as Daniel continued to speak. I felt the room close in around me. The blood drained from my face, and the weight of the moment hit me like a ton of bricks. There, sitting front and center, was the woman who had been more than just Robert's assistant, more than just the woman who had spent years working at his side. She was now being called family. I was the real wife, the mother who had sacrificed everything for this family, and yet there she was, being praised. I couldn't breathe. I had known of Linda, of course, Robert's loyal administrative assistant. I'd always thought she was just another one of his employees, someone I had dismissed as a sycophant. But now, seeing her sitting there, dressed to perfection, it was clear that my judgment had been far off. I turned my eyes to Daniel, hoping for a moment of recognition, hoping that, after everything, he would say something that would make me feel seen. But no, he finished his speech and, to my utter disbelief, walked over to Linda. With the room watching, Daniel hugged her tightly. "You're the one who's truly family," he whispered. The words echoed in my mind as the world around me seemed to spin. I stood there, frozen in complete silence. The tears that had been threatening to fall throughout the service suddenly spilled over, but they weren't tears of grief. They were tears of something much darker, betrayal. I had given everything for this family. I had given up my career, my independence, my identity to support Robert, to build a life together. And now, at the moment of his death, I was being erased. I had spent the years maintaining the perfect facade, always smiling, always making sure Robert's world was in order. But now, at his funeral, I realized that the world I had worked so hard to build had crumbled, and I was left standing in the rubble, invisible. I thought I had lost Robert. I thought I had lost my husband. But now, I was losing my son as well. As I stood there, watching the scene unfold, I couldn't shake the feeling that something more was at play here. The betrayal ran deeper than I had ever imagined. The funeral was not just the end of Robert's life, it was the beginning of my own unraveling. The day I went to the lawyer's office, I never expected the world to shatter again. The sun was out, but the warmth of it never quite reached me as I sat in the stark, beige waiting room. I could feel my pulse echoing in my throat, my fingers gripping the leather of my handbag so tightly that my knuckles turned white. I had never imagined that I would be here, on the other side of the table, facing the truth that would forever change my life. The moment the lawyer, Mr. Lawson, called me into his office, I felt the weight of the room settle over me. He was a tall man with a somber expression, the kind of face that made you want to trust him, even when your world was falling apart. But as soon as he sat me down and opened the file, I knew something was terribly wrong. Mrs. Des Smith, he began, his voice as calm as ever. We've gone over your husband's will. I must inform you that the majority of his assets have been left to M's Linda Mallister. My heart dropped. I stared at him, unable to comprehend what I had just heard. Linda, the woman who had been my husband's assistant, the woman I'd brushed off as nothing more than another employee, another face in the background, the woman who had been sitting in the front row of his funeral, receiving praise from our son as if she was family. I wanted to laugh, bitter, hollow laughter, but nothing came out. I could feel the room spinning as I tried to keep my composure. Excuse me? I managed to croak. What do you mean, everything? What about me? Mr. Lawson adjusted his glasses, his fingers tapping lightly on the papers in front of him. The estate, the properties, the funds, all of it. Robert made it clear that Ems Mallister was to inherit everything: the main residence, the vacation home in Nantucket, even the investments he had been working on in recent years. The words felt like a slap, each one landing harder than the last. Everything? Everything? I could feel the ground beneath me begin to shift. My knees were weak, my breath short, but I refused to show any sign of weakness. I had to hold it together, for my dignity, for my pride. I had spent 40 years living for him, and now, in death, he had betrayed me in the most unimaginable way. What about our son? I asked, my voice trembling now. He's his heir, isn't he? Mr. Lawson hesitated. Daniel is mentioned in the will, but he is not to inherit any assets at this time. Robert was clear that everything was to go to Ems Mallister. I leaned back in my chair, trying to process the devastation, but nothing made sense. Robert had always been careful with money, always meticulous. He had promised me that everything was taken care of, that I would never have to worry. How could he do this? How could he leave me with nothing after everything I had given him? A cold chill ran through me as I began to piece together the events of the past few years. The late nights at the office, the strange phone calls, the moments when he seemed distant, as if there was something more he wasn't telling me. How could I have been so blind? Mrs. Des Smith, Mr. Lawson's voice brought me back to the present. I understand this is difficult, but I must ask, did you have any knowledge of this arrangement? I shook my head, the disbelief still holding me in place. No, I had no idea. I thought, I thought we had a good marriage. It was then that the full weight of the betrayal hit me. It wasn't just the inheritance. It wasn't just the assets. It was the life I had lived, the years I had devoted to him, to our family, that had all been a lie. Robert had not only taken everything from me, he had erased me entirely from his plans. I stood up, feeling dizzy, the room closing in around me. So, what now? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. What do I do now? Mr. Lawson's gaze softened, but there was nothing comforting in his words. We can contest the will if you wish, but it will be a long and difficult process. Ems Mallister has already begun making arrangements, and she has every legal right to the estate. I didn't know how long I sat there after he finished speaking. The world had gone quiet, and in that silence, the reality of it all sank in. My marriage, my life, the years I had spent sacrificing everything for him. It was all a cruel joke, one that had ended with me standing here, alone with nothing. I left the lawyer's office in a daze, barely remembering the drive home. My mind was a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions, but one thing was clear. I could never let this stand. I had to fight for what was mine, for what Robert had stolen from me. The woman who had taken everything from me may have thought she had won, but she was wrong. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I couldn't shake the image of the lawyer's office from my mind. Linda Mallister. The name repeated in my thoughts like a drum beat, each time louder and more accusing. It was as if the pieces of my life, my marriage, had been scattered, and I was now left with the painful task of gathering them back together, piece by piece. The house felt emptier than ever. I walked through the rooms, touching the familiar furniture, each item once a symbol of our shared life. Now, it was just a collection of ghosts, reminders of a man I no longer recognized. I needed answers. I needed to understand how this had happened, how we had ended up here. I started with the file cabinet in the study, the drawer that had always held important documents, marriage certificates, tax records, insurance policies. I pulled it open, the familiar scent of paper and ink filling the air. I sorted through the clutter, shuffling past old receipts and documents that meant nothing now, until I found a folder marked Property Investments. It wasn't just business. I could tell by the weight of it that Robert had kept these records close, hidden from me. As I flipped through the pages, my fingers trembling, I saw it. The name that had haunted me since that morning. Linda Mallister. There it was again, scribbled next to a list of properties, a company name, and a series of dates. The documents spoke of transactions, purchases, things I had never been told about. The first property was listed in her name, a house in Summerball, bought just 6 years ago, a few months after Robert had promised me that we were financially secure. My breath caught in my throat as I read the transaction details. It was a large sum, well beyond what Robert had ever told me about. And then there were two other properties, both in her name, both paid for with funds I had never seen. How had I missed this? How had I been so blind? I slammed the file shut and moved to the next place, the attic. Over the years, we'd stored old photo albums, keepsakes, letters, everything that held the memories of a life I thought I knew. But now, those memories felt like nothing more than a facade. The stairs creaked beneath my feet as I climbed to the attic. Dust particles danced in the sunlight that filtered through the small window. I rummaged through boxes until I found what I was looking for, an old suitcase with Robert's name written in black ink on the side. I opened it slowly, dreading what I might find. Inside, there were photos, dozens of them. Robert, Linda, and even Daniel standing together at company events. In one photo, they were laughing, her hand resting casually on his shoulder. Another picture showed them sitting close at a Christmas party, their faces lit by the glow of the tree lights. In the background, I saw the reflection of our home, a home I had once thought was a sanctuary. The more I looked, the more it became clear. This wasn't a brief affair. This wasn't a fling that had started after Robert's death. No, this had been going on for years, decades, possibly. Linda hadn't just inserted herself into our lives at the end. She had been there all along, quietly taking over pieces of what should have been mine. I sank to the floor, the weight of it all crushing me. How could I not have known? How could I have been so blind? The life I had built, the love I had given, was it all just an illusion? But even through the pain and the anger, something inside me began to shift. This was no accident. Robert hadn't made a mistake. This had been planned, and I couldn't just sit here and accept it. I had to find out everything. I had to uncover the full extent of the betrayal. The next day, I reached out to Ruth, an old colleague of mine from Robert's firm. She retired a few years ago, but we'd stayed in touch. Ruth was sharp, methodical, and she knew how to dig through layers of paperwork without anyone knowing. I needed her expertise, her eyes on the records that were now starting to tell a much darker story. We need to go back through everything, I told her when she picked up the phone. Every financial record, every business transaction. Something doesn't add up, Ruth. Robert was hiding something, and it's bigger than I realized. Ruth was quiet for a moment, then replied, "You think this was planned, don't you? That he was using his company funds for her?" I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. "I do, and I won't rest until I get to the bottom of it." I hung up the phone and sat back in my chair, feeling the weight of my decision. I had spent years trusting Robert, building a life with him, and now I was questioning everything. But there was no turning back. The mystery was deeper than I had imagined, and I couldn't let it go. The answers were out there, and I would find them, no matter what it took. The first day of the court proceedings was the beginning of something I had never imagined I would have to endure. I had always believed that once Robert was gone, his memory would be the only thing left to guide me. But now, his memory was being used against me, twisted into something unrecognizable. And I had to fight for what was mine, what should have always been mine. I had hired Michelle Robinson, a sharp and no nonsense lawyer who specialized in estate law. She was the kind of woman who never blinked in the face of injustice, and that was exactly what I needed. Michelle had been the first person to truly understand the gravity of what I was up against. "You're not just fighting for assets," she had told me during our first meeting. "This is about your dignity, about your legacy. We're going to expose everything, no stone left unturned." The day we walked into the courthouse felt surreal. The grand marble pillars and high ceilings were a world away from the suffocating, empty house I had been living in. Yet, even here, I felt the same sense of isolation. The truth about Robert's betrayal hung over me like a cloud, and I wasn't sure how much longer I could carry it. The case was not just about money, it was about the years of my life that had been stolen from me, the emotional toll of being erased from the man I had loved and sacrificed for. It was about the lies he had built and the betrayal that had shattered everything. As I sat in the courtroom, Michelle beside me, I couldn't stop my hands from shaking. The opposition was led by Linda Mallister's lawyer, a slick man named Gregory Harris. His confident smirk made my blood boil. He walked into the room like he owned the place, his eyes scanning the crowd, nodding to the judge with practiced ease. Linda sat at the front of the room, her gaze fixed ahead. She was calm, composed, everything I wasn't. Her presence was a constant reminder of the life she had been living behind closed doors, a life she was now trying to take from me. I wanted to scream, to confront her right then and there, but I kept my composure. I had to play this game carefully. Gregory stood up, addressing the judge with a well-rehearsed speech. "Your Honor, we are here today to confirm the validity of the will signed by the late Robert De Smith. Ems Mallister is entitled to the assets, as stipulated clearly by Mr. Des Smith's wishes. There is no question of fraud, no question of any wrongdoing. This is a simple matter of honoring the deceased's final wishes." It was like a slap in the face. To them, it was simple, but for me, it was everything. Michelle leaned in and whispered, "We'll expose the truth, Maggie. Just wait." The day dragged on as the evidence was presented. Gregory made his arguments, throwing around legal jargon with practiced ease, but Michelle was methodical in her responses. She brought out the first piece of the puzzle, the financial records I had uncovered. It wasn't just about Linda inheriting Robert's estate. It was the fact that the funds for her properties had come from Robert's company, funds that should have gone to the shareholders, to his family, to me. Michelle called up an expert witness, an accountant who had worked with Robert's firm for over a decade. He was able to testify that the transfers of large sums of money to Linda had been disguised as legitimate consulting fees. In reality, they were gifts, fraudulent, hidden, and illegal. The courtroom was silent as the expert laid out the evidence, pointing to the series of transactions that had occurred over the years. "These payments," he said, "were not for services rendered. They were personal gifts, plain and simple. The amounts were far higher than what would be considered a standard consulting fee, and the timing of these transactions is highly suspicious." It was the first real blow to Linda's defense. A murmur ran through the courtroom, and I felt a flicker of hope. But just when I thought the tide might be turning in my favor, I felt the weight of the next betrayal hit me like a punch to the gut. Daniel stood up. I had been dreading this moment. My son, my only child, was about to speak. He stood there, his face tense, his posture rigid. His eyes met mine, but there was no warmth in them, only coldness. He didn't look at me the way he used to. He didn't look like the little boy who had once clung to my side for comfort. "I'd like to speak, Your Honor," Daniel said, his voice steady but heavy with emotion. My heart pounded in my chest as I watched him take a stand. How had we gotten here? How had he become so distant from me? So aligned with the woman who had destroyed everything? Daniel spoke of Robert's wishes, how his father had trusted Linda, how she had been there for him when no one else was. He spoke with conviction, and I saw Linda's eyes gleam with triumph from across the room. She had already won him over. "I don't understand why this is even being contested," Daniel continued. "My father was very clear about who should inherit his estate. He wanted Linda to have it. She was there for him when nobody else was." Each word cut through me like a blade. He didn't even acknowledge the years I had spent supporting him, the sacrifices I had made for this family. He spoke as though I was nothing but a shadow in his life, a woman who had been too strong, too demanding of Robert's love. "Daniel, please," I whispered, my voice barely audible, my heart breaking. "This isn't about her. This is about us. This is about the years I spent by your father's side, by both of your sides." But he didn't respond. He couldn't. I had lost him. I could feel it in the way he looked at me, in the way he stood with Linda. The emotional weight of that moment was unbearable. I had not only lost Robert, but I was losing my son as well. As the day wore on, I found myself pushing aside the hurt, the betrayal, the fear. I had no choice. I couldn't break down in front of everyone. I had to stay strong for myself, for the truth. The court case was far from over, and the emotional stakes were higher than ever. But with each piece of evidence that came to light, with each illegal battle won, my resolve grew stronger. I wasn't just fighting for money. I wasn't even just fighting for justice. I was fighting for my dignity, for the truth that had been buried for far too long. And I would not stop until I had it.